the literal sequence of events and their cause and effect in relation to each other. This happened, therefore this happened, etc. E.M. Forster writes in aspects of the novel, "The king died and the queen died is a story. The king died and then the queen died of grief is a plot." That's the difference. The king and queen died is a simple story. The king died and then the queen died of grief is a plot because her death is now causally connected to his death. In storytelling, there are 6 basic plots. Some argue there are more, but for the most part, every book, every movie, every story you've come across likely falls into one of these plots. They are tragedy, a fall from good standing to a bad one; rags to riches, the opposite of a tragedy, a constant rise from a bad standing to a good one; Icarus, a rise followed by a fall; Oedipus, a fall, a rise, and then another fall; Cinderella, rise, fall, rise; Man in a hole, fall, rise. Since with weddings it's a love story, we often use the rags to riches plot. The characters are already in love, and from the start of the day through to the actual wedding ceremony, it's a constant rise. And even beyond that, the rise of the celebration. Sometimes wedding films can use the Cinderella plot. Say, for example, you're able to show in the film that the couple met and then maybe they broke up, or something like that for a while, had some struggles, then came back, ended up together. Take, for example, a film we created a while back for Kaylee and Kyle. This story follows the Cinderella plot. The couple met, fell in love. The bride lost her dad, suffered tragedy, and lost herself. Then Kyle persisted, and then they found each other again, and they got married and lived happily ever after. Narrative. How is the story told rather than what is told? It's how the plot unfolds. In mainstream film, this is the 3-act structure: the beginning, the middle, and the end. The story progresses not randomly, but by connecting elements like logic or cause and effect. This happened, therefore this happened, etc. The plot doesn't necessarily have to be in order or told sequentially. The narrative is how this is formed. Narrative is one of the most important parts of wedding films because we already know the ending. We know the couple end up together, but how they do and how the story is told is what keeps the viewer engaged. We don't have the benefit of obvious conflict that is so crucial in traditional storytelling, so the how becomes very important. There are a handful of different types of narrative structures when it comes to filmmaking. Linear, which is very common. The story is told entirely chronologically. Non-linear, in which the story is told non-chronologically and jumps around in time. Circular, the story ends where it began, and even though it starts and ends in the same place, the characters go through a transformation. Parallel, this is a story with multiple plot lines which are connected through a character or event. In narrative structure, there are also elements that you need to be aware of in order to tell an effective story. Exposition, introducing the characters, explaining the needs of the plot, the setting, building the world, and setting the tone. Rising action, the central conflict and tension between the characters. This one's really hard for weddings as there rarely is, again, conflict in a traditional sense. Climax, the peak of the arc. This is where there is a change in the characters. Falling action, the aftermath of the major action. We like to think of this as like the winding down portion of a wedding film. Often we portray it in happy moments and dancing. Resolution, the new normal, where the characters have arrived after going through a transformation, or sometimes we think of it as the happy ending. In a traditional movie, these elements make up the 3-act structure. A film opens and introduces the world and the characters through exposition and visuals. That is the first act. Then there is an inciting incident, where the rising action begins. This is the second act and carries us through the middle of the film at a constant rise until the climax, where a transformation occurs. Then the falling action and resolution make up the final act. So how does narrative affect wedding films? For wedding films, we're usually dealing with a much shorter runtime than a Hollywood movie. We're also dealing with the fact that the viewer knows that the central characters, the couple, end up together, but that's okay. We can still apply these elements to wedding films. Now, no matter what narrative structure you use to tell your story, there are elements to be aware of, especially when editing. This is something we'll dive deeper into in the post-production stage, but overall, you can play around with narrative. Throw convention out the window. You can work through it multiple ways until it works. Not every film will be the same, and in fact, it really shouldn't be. And the struggle to find the narrative is usually what frustrates people with storytelling. Character. Who is this story about? Not just names or faces, but who are they? What are their personalities? What are their motivations? And how can you communicate this effectively to the viewer? Martin Scorsese says, "The films that I constantly revisited or saw repeatedly held up longer for me over the years, not because of plot, but because of character. and a very different approach to story. For weddings, one of the most important elements of story is character. Remember, weddings are about people. They are love stories, and couples reveal so much about the story in their actions and in their words. In theory, you could just tell a story of a personality-less, faceless bride or groom, but that's not very interesting. We're all human. We make connections with other people. It's important for the viewer to be able to identify with the characters in your film. Characters are three-dimensional. Show that. Sure, you could say it doesn't really matter because the people watching the film already know who the couple are, and you're right, but in our opinion, we want to aim to create something bigger than that. You should be telling stories that anyone can watch and connect with. This will make a much more compelling film for any viewer, and even a deeper one for your couple. Because remember, in 30 years, when they're watching this film again, they will see who they were at the time, not just what was documented, what the flowers looked like, and what happened. There's so much more to a wedding than just the day. It's about a very long journey, about two unique people, how they met, why they fell in love, ended up together, and got to their wedding day.